What's your take on the specs of this new Note 9, the good and perhaps the not so good?
Sure. I mean, they're really positioning it as a huge leap forward, this new big thing for consumers, but the reality is what looks new is new to consumers, and this phone does not look much different than its predecessor, the Note 8. It has a slightly bigger screen, a much upgraded stylus, more storage capacity, a bit of a faster processor, but I don't think that's enough to move the needle to spur upgrades from the previous model.
Bob, you were there as well. Would you agree?
Well, generally I would agree. The difference is, I would say, people aren't upgrading every year for any phones anymore. And so the market realities have changed, right? People are now upgrading every 2 years, every 2.5 years. So when you think it from that perspective, and you have people who have older Samsung phones, it's nice. But look, Mark's right. It's incremental at best. You know, the phone, or the pen technology is kind of interesting. There were more interesting announcements later in the event. And frankly, if you look at the time spent across the entire event, the time spent on the phone was actually relatively modest, because it was a relatively modest upgrade.
Now, Mark, you've done some incredible reporting on the iPhones to come. How does what was revealed today compare to what you expect Apple to unveil in the fall?
Well, that's very kind of you. It's a team effort, but it fits right into what we were expecting from both Samsung and Apple this year. Not really significant upgrades. Apple's upgrade is not very significant in September on the feature side. It's significant in how many different versions of the iPhone X they're going to have now, different screen sizes, different pricing strategies. So it's really going to be an exercise in marketing, and I think that's the same thing going on with the Note 8 now, given it's not that big of a leap as well.
Look, Bob, there have been questions about whether customers are going to pay that $1,000 for the iPhone X. Same question here. Do people really want to pay that much for a Samsung phone?
Well, look, if Samsung has any Apple fanboy, fangirl equivalent, it's the Galaxy Note owners. They are the most dedicated, most faithful to the brand folks, and there are people in that group who want the best Android phone, and I think they will. And by the way, the 512 gigabyte model is actually going to be $1,249, so they're at an even higher price point there. So, but again, this is not the entire market. This is, and Samsung knows that, this is their dedicated Galaxy Note people, the people who like using the pen, which is why the primary focus of the new features were around the pen. And so from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But to me, what's more interesting, and Mark and I were chatting a little bit about this, is the Spotify news. To me, that was interesting because it reflects a bigger picture strategy story from Samsung across the board, across all their different devices.
And how does that, Mark, compare with Apple, which of course has Apple Music?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So Spotify at a low level is not going very much in-house. They're not building up this new streaming music service themselves. They used to have one called Milk. I think they've had a few others over the years. They've sort of terminated all of those projects, and now partnering with Spotify, which I think still has the top best brand recognition for any streaming music service. It's a smooth move by Samsung, and even Spotify investors seem pretty impressed by it. If you look at the Spotify stock, it's up several % this morning just from this announcement.
Other product announcements: a revamped smartwatch, a home digital speaker. Mark, you've been tweeting about the size of this speaker, 1.5 times the size of the HomePod, which is already quite large. What's your take on these other products?
I mean, the Galaxy Watch is a revamped version of the smartwatch strategy they've already had for the past few years. I don't think it's going to move the needle. The market has truly become saturated at that $300 to $800 price point with the Apple Watch. Fitbit really has the sub $200 price point, so I'm not really sure where Samsung is going to fit in there. On the other hand, the home speaker, it's also coming in extraordinarily late, right? The Amazon Echo came out, what, 3-4 years ago, announced in 2014, so almost 5 years ago now. The HomePod was late as well, coming out in February earlier this year. But Amazon and Google Home really have a handle on that market, so I'm not really sure what percentage of the market Samsung is going to be able to grab with this device, especially with such few details they're providing on this. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not released until the very end of this year or early 2019. So they're extraordinarily late to the game here on the Galaxy Home speaker, and it does not appear that they're bringing any new innovative functionality to the table that would inspire anyone to buy one of these things.
Bob, is it too late for Samsung and Apple in smart speakers?
Well, it's going to be very challenging. As Mark pointed out, you've already got a very strong position for both Amazon and Google. Look, the one thing I will say across the board for the different Galaxy products is we are seeing Samsung talk about Galaxy brand. It's interesting that they changed it to Galaxy Watch, and they call it Galaxy Home. They're trying to build this overall connected device story, which I think is a unique opportunity for Samsung, because when you think about all the appliances they make and all the other things they do, they're the only company in the world that potentially can do that. But again, the real test is going to be in the execution. How well does Bixby actually work on that speaker? Having Spotify bundled with a smart speaker, I do think is attractive, and that is a unique opportunity from them from a general music perspective. But look, it's going to be an uphill battle.